Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, June 12, 2024. House votes to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress for defying a subpoena to turn over the audio of President Biden's interview with Special Counsel Robert Hur in the classified documents investigation. The vote was 216 to 207. White House and House Republicans react to the news of the arrest of 8 migrants in the U.S. suspected of ties to ISIS. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell announces no change to interest rates, saying that inflation, while it slowed recently, is still too high, and the labor market still too strong to start cutting rates now. Amtrak CEO tells a House subcommittee the passenger railroad is now above pre-COVID pandemic ridership levels. Senate Judiciary Committee members of both parties criticize FDA and Justice Department officials for not doing more to stop the sale in the U.S. of non-approved e-cigarette products, many with flavors to appeal to children, and many imported from China. Senate Finance Committee releases a report accusing many large companies that operate youth residential treatment facilities of putting profit over the well-being and safety of the children. U.S. House starts on the annual Defense Policy and Programs bill. We'll talk with Washington Times reporter Lindsay McPherson about the amendments which may be offered on Ukraine and Gaza, also abortion and diversity programs. President Joe Biden flies to Italy for the G7 Leaders Summit, where the White House says he'll sign a security cooperation agreement with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Qatar, asked about Hamas wanting changes to the ceasefire with Israel proposal that President Biden has promoted. And tonight is the annual congressional baseball game. We'll hear from the starting pitchers for the Democrats and Republicans. We begin on the House floor in debate before the vote to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress for not complying with subpoena for audio of Special Counsel Robert Hur's interview with President Joe Biden in the investigation of the president's handling of classified documents. The Justice Department gave Congress a transcript of the interview, but the president has exerted executive privilege over the audio. Congressman Dan Bishop, Republican from North Carolina, voted yes on the contempt resolution and explained why on the House floor.
This matter is simple, and in its simplicity is the clarity of its appropriate resolution. The audio recording of President Biden's interview with Special Counsel Robert Hur is demeanor evidence. Demeanor is one's outward manner, a way of conducting oneself, one might say, is bearing. And in some circumstances, demeanor evidence is the most probative, powerful evidence that can be heard. Better than words, it can evidence credibility or evasiveness and avoidance. And especially in this circumstance, it can evidence a witness's capacities to observe, recall, and relate information accurately. President Biden shared classified information with his ghostwriter in pursuance of securing his $3 million book advance. Mr. Hur attributed the Justice Department's decision not to recommend prosecution of President Biden for misusing, mishandling classified documents on this and other occasions to the facts that he is an elderly man with poor memory. A raw transcript doesn't inform the Judiciary Committee sufficiently to evaluate the reasonableness of that determination, especially since President Biden hotly contested Special Counsel Hur's characterization. Demeanor evidence could powerfully clarify whether that exercise of prosecutorial discretion was politically neutral or politically freighted. In fact, it is the very power of the demeanor evidence in the audio of Biden's interview that Garland inadvertently acknowledges in stubbornly withholding it. If it were nothing more than a duplicate of the transcript, it would never have been refused. The Justice Department, the Attorney General have not a leg to stand on. Their refusal is the essence of contempt. Garland's own words reflect it in the hearing before the Judiciary Committee the other day. He said certain members of this committee have marked up a contempt resolution. But as I pointed out to the Attorney General, it was a majority of the members of the committee, and he retracted those words. A majority of the committee charged by a majority of this House with inquiring into the existence of grounds to exercise the awesome constitutional power of impeachment. The Attorney General's reference to certain members reflects a political mindset that does not support withholding evidence that the committee seeks that is squarely relevant and essential to its inquiry. That defiance the House cannot abide. Therefore, this resolution for contempt must pass this House.
Congressman Dan Bishop, Republican from North Carolina, on the House floor before this resolution did pass. Congresswoman Madeline Dean, Democrat from Pennsylvania, was in opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this contempt resolution is the latest attempt to tear down our democracy. The Department of Justice has cooperated with congressional Republicans at every turn. But after 92,000 pages of documents, more than a dozen transcribed interviews, and a 250-page transcript that was verified, my colleagues still aren't satisfied. They are doing this in service of one man, the disgraced former president, in a misguided attempt to distract from his crimes. On May 30th, a jury of stranger citizens found Mr. Trump guilty of 34 felony charges. It is beyond disheartening that a former president and now potential presidential candidate again was convicted of coordinating a, quote, unlawful conspiracy to win in the 2016 election and falsifying records to cover his tryst with an adult porn star. I'm grateful that the rule of law prevailed, yet I am deeply concerned that our democratic institutions are under threat. Some of these attacks coming from within. Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan said a kangaroo court convicted President Trump. Speaker Johnson called the trial a purely political exercise. Mr. Trump apparently pities himself as a so-called political prisoner. All this to tear down our Americans' faith in the rule of law. Contrary to his complaints, Mr. Trump was tried and treated fairly. Justice was served in a courtroom that was open and filled with reporters, and a jury that was chosen by the prosecution and the defense. This is the rule of law at work. Political rhetoric and deliberate misinformation, the likes of these and dangerous many others, erode faith in our institutions and threaten the safety of the American people. These attacks undermine the rule of law, which stands to protect the rights of all people. When Attorney General Merrick Garland was before the Judiciary Committee—
Mr. Speaker, I yield the gentlelady an additional 30 seconds.
Thank you. When Attorney General was before the Judiciary Committee, he described his career upholding the rule of law. In his own words, that meant ensuring that, quote, we treat like cases alike, that we do not have enemies or friends, that we do not pay attention to the political parties or the wealth or the power or the influence of the people we are investigating, that we follow the facts and the law. This is what distinguishes America from our adversaries.
Congresswoman Madeline Dean, Democrat from Pennsylvania, on the House floor during debate on the resolution to hold the Attorney General in contempt of Congress. The resolution passed by a vote of 216 to 207. It was overwhelmingly party line. Republicans yes, Democrats no. Only one Republican voted no, David Joyce of Ohio. Story from The Hill. An internal Justice Department memo argued Attorney General Merrick Garland would be protected from prosecution for contempt of Congress, given President Biden's assertion of executive privilege over audio tapes Republicans have sought to subpoena. From the Office of Legal Counsel wrote that no administration official has been prosecuted for failing to comply with a subpoena when the president has claimed executive privilege. From ABC News, 8 individuals from Tajikistan with suspected ties to ISIS who crossed into the United States from the southern border last year and this year have been detained in Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and New York City. According to a source familiar with the investigation, the suspects were initially allowed to enter the U.S. after being vetted, and no national security issues were uncovered, the source said. Later, and in recent weeks, authorities uncovered derogatory information indicating ties or affiliation with ISIS, and the suspects were sought and detained. Efforts are underway to deport the suspects, as currently authorities have not developed enough evidence to bring any terrorism charges. That was from ABC News. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, and the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre both reacted to this news today. First, Speaker Johnson.
The Biden border catastrophe continues in spite of his window dressing of the executive order. Nothing's changed, of course. In fact, many have argued that this increased the incentives for people to try to come and avail themselves of the welcome mat that the Biden administration has put forward. And you saw and you heard that 8 ISIS-affiliated persons have been apprehended. The open border has welcomed many dangerous people, and none of us knows exactly how many of them are here, may have set up terrorist cells in America, because the border's been wide open for 3.5 years, as we've recounted here, every week upon week upon week. We're demanding actual executive action from the president, and he is unwilling to provide it, and so Americans are in danger because of that.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, at a news conference on Capitol Hill. The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre got a question about this from a reporter on Air Force One as they were all flying from Washington, D.C. to Italy for the G7 summit.
The executive actions last week, over the last 24 hours, there have been a number of reports about suspected terrorists at ports of entry, and then also a sting operation where suspected ISIS terrorists were collected throughout the United States. Do you guys believe so far that the executive actions are working, or is there going to be another announcement down the line with more to do?
So a couple of things. DHS put out a joint statement, so I would refer you to that statement on that particular question that you just asked me about those 8, I believe there were 8 individuals. And we're also grateful for the law enforcement for their quick work on this to make sure that we keep Americans safe. This is another example of why we think some calls from Republicans to defund the FBI is a bad idea, is troublesome, and so we'll continue to call that out as well. But again, DHS and DOJ put out a statement, a joint statement, so I would refer you to that. As it relates to the executive action the president did last week, look, just to take a step back just for a second, this is a president that has taken the issue of what we're seeing at the border, the immigration system being broken very seriously. I mean, very, very seriously. That's why he put out a comprehensive legislation on day one. That's why he worked with senators, both Republicans and Democrats, for a couple of months to bring forth a plan, a policy that he wants to sign. He wanted them to move forward with it, and Republicans rejected their own plan. And so he wants to see a bipartisan solution here, but that didn't happen. As you noted, he took an executive action. As it relates to any impact of those actions, we're still early in the implementation phase, but we look at this in its totality when it comes to actions, just the actions that we took this year as well. And so it's including our work with international partners like Mexico. Encounters are down more than 50% from December. And so, however, we understand the migration flows are dynamic, and we'll continue to surge resources and personnel to the areas that need them. But the president, again, wants to do this in a bipartisan way. He believes this is the best way to deal with this broken system, a system that's been broken for decades, is to have both sides come together and have a legislative answer to this.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre holding a news conference on Air Force One during the trip from Washington, D.C. to Italy with President Biden for the G7 Leaders Summit. The joint statement from the FBI and Homeland Security Department that she referenced confirmed the arrests and concludes the FBI and the department will continue working around the clock with our partners to identify, investigate, and disrupt potential threats to national security. The Federal Reserve, writes USA Today, kept its key interest rate unchanged again Wednesday and scaled back its forecast from 3 rate cuts to just 1 this year after an inflation pickup in early 2024. The outlook will likely disappoint markets that figured the Fed would pencil in 2 cuts after an encouraging report early Wednesday showed inflation slowing more than expected. That was from USA Today. The Bureau of Labor Statistics at the Labor Department reported this morning that the Consumer Price Index rose 3.3% in May versus a year ago, slower than the 3.4% in April. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell held a news conference today.
My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. Our monetary policy actions are guided by our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. In support of these goals, the committee decided at today's meeting to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate at 5.25% to 5.5%, and to continue reducing our securities holdings. As labor market tightness has eased and inflation has declined over the past year, the risks to achieving our employment and inflation goals have moved toward better balance. The economic outlook is uncertain, however, and we remain highly attentive to inflation risks. We've stated that we do not expect it will be appropriate to reduce the target range for the federal funds rate until we have gained greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainably toward 2%. So far this year, the data have not given us that greater confidence. The most recent inflation readings have been more favorable than earlier in the year, however, and there has been modest further progress toward our inflation objective. We'll need to see more good data to bolster our confidence that inflation is moving sustainably toward 2%. We know that reducing policy restraint too soon or too much could result in a reversal of the progress that we've seen on inflation. At the same time, reducing policy restraint too late or too little could unduly weaken economic activity and employment. In considering any adjustments to the target range for the federal funds rate, the committee will carefully assess incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks.
The Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell at his news conference at Fed headquarters in Washington, D.C. Wall Street reaction, the Dow down 35, NASDAQ up 264, S&P up 45. Amtrak CEO Stephen Gardner testified today about the U.S. passenger railroad, saying it expects this year to exceed pre-COVID-19 pandemic ridership, even though it has less capacity. Stephen Gardner testified before the House Railroads Subcommittee.
Amtrak has accomplished a great deal during FY24. Our ridership and revenue are up over 20% and 10% respectively, and May was our best revenue month ever in the history of the company. We're on track to set a new record ridership this year and will further reduce our operating losses. We've expanded service with our state partners, and on the Northeast Corridor, we've added frequencies to meet demand. Thanks to the funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, construction is now underway or starting soon on truly massive projects that we've been discussing for decades, like the Hudson and Frederick Douglass Tunnel projects, the Portal North, Connecticut, and Susquehanna River bridges, and redevelopment of our stations in Chicago and Philadelphia. We are also acquiring new equipment that will transform the travel experience. Our new Acela trains are in testing now and could enter service around the end of this year. Our new Amtrak Arrows for regional service in the Northeast and state-supported routes are arriving in 2026, and we are out to bid right now for a new fleet of long-distance trains.
Amtrak CEO Stephen Gardner testifying before the House Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee on Railroads. The 2021 infrastructure law he mentioned provided $66 billion for rail projects. Stephen Gardner said that Amtrak's goal is to double ridership by 2040. During the Q&A, Congressman David Rouser, Republican from North Carolina, asked him about an issue that's just a few blocks from the House office building where the hearing took place, Amtrak taking over Union Station by eminent domain.
You recently testified regarding Amtrak's desire to purchase and manage Union Station. You indicated your plan was to transform the station from the current mixed-use retail, restaurant, and transit hub to a sole-purpose passenger holding center. One thing I'm a little concerned about here, we have a homeless issue there now. You take all those stores out, you take the mixed use out. Number one, where are we getting the funding to do all this? And are you concerned that it's just going to be a much greater magnet for the homeless? Well, it's a beautiful building.
Absolutely, a beautiful building, Congressman. And our intention actually is to enhance and maintain the retail, but better amenities. As you know, right now it's about half empty because of all the folks that have left during that period. Amtrak doesn't have possession of the building yet, but our goal is in fact to do what you just described, create a lively mixed-use environment which supports all the transportation users. The big issue is that Amtrak was sort of sequestered in the back. We've more than doubled the ridership since we had this little leasehold in the back of the station. The main part of the building wasn't used for passenger transportation, even though we have MARC service and VRE service and WMATA. So we're just talking about using more of the building to serve the needs of the passengers while also creating a great community amenity and a place that millions of people come to visit every year from all over the United States when they come to visit this building and Washington. So we believe very much in a successful venture that will drive both commercial revenue so we can reinvest in the facility and also the kind of amenities that people want in our train stations. So they want the bookstores, they want to be able to go to the cafe, they want a restaurant, and we want to serve the neighborhood well.
Amtrak CEO Stephen Gardner being questioned by Congressman David Rouzer, Republican from North Carolina, at today's subcommittee hearing. From Associated Press, senators on Wednesday blasted top health and law enforcement officials for not doing more to combat the rise of illegal electronic cigarettes in the U.S., a multi-billion-dollar business that has flourished amid haphazard enforcement. Democrats and Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee expressed frustration and exasperation while questioning officials from the Food and Drug Administration and Justice Department about attempts to stay on top of the vaping industry, which has grown to include thousands of flavored, unauthorized e-cigarettes originating in China. Those products, including brands like Elf Bar, have become the most popular choice among American teens who vape. Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, the committee chair, displayed a photo of brightly colored e-cigarettes, including ones in dragon fruit and watermelon bubblegum flavors, which he said a Senate staffer took at a vape shop near the FDA's Maryland campus. That was from Associated Press. Here is Senator Durbin questioning Brian King, director of the Food and Drug Administration's Center for Tobacco Products, about that photo.
To date, the FDA has authorized 23 e-cigarette brands, and no flavored cigarettes have been authorized by the FDA. Take a look at this photo. It was taken by my staff just a few days ago at a vape shop less than 1 mile removed from the FDA's headquarters. It shows Fat Boys Red Bull Strawberry Vape and V-Hose Dragon Fruit Watermelon Vapes. Right here is this so-called Elf Bar Watermelon Bubblegum Vape purchased from that store less than 1 mile away from the FDA headquarters. Not a single one of these products has been authorized by the FDA. None of them. These illegal products, clearly designed for kids by their flavors, are being sold in FDA's shadow of their building headquarters, less than 1 mile from your headquarters. How is that allowed to happen, Dr. King?
I'll reinforce that we do have a pre-market paradigm for reviewing applications, and the sheer volume of the volume of those applications and the volume of the market requires us to prioritize our enforcement efforts.
That's what I really want to get to here. So you're saying that if they're a burden of proof on the manufacturer under the law, they have to prove appropriate for public health before they will be approved by the FDA. That proof is not made, and yet these products are going for sale. You've completely fallen down on the job. Your responsibility is to impose the burden of proof and not allow the sale of these e-vape cigarettes to kids unless they are approved by the FDA, correct?
Correct.
So let's hear the answer.
I'll reinforce that there's the sheer volume of this product landscape requires time to ensure that we conduct scientifically defensible and legally defensible reviews of the 27 million applications.
It's not your burden. It's their burden. They have to prove they're appropriate for public health. You don't have to disprove it.
Senator Dick Durbin, Judiciary Committee chair, at today's hearing. Senator Durbin pointed out that only 24 vaping products have been approved for sale by the FDA. FDA's Brian King said there have been 27 million applications that the FDA needs to sort through. Senator Tom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, also questioned Brian King about the illegal vaping products for sale and also mentioned the value, he said, of e-cigarettes for adults who wish to quit smoking combustible tobacco.
You have responded to Senator Durbin's questions that you have to review every application. And so are we saying that right now we're in a posture where these products are given the benefit of the doubt pending review?
No, there's no safe harbor for simply submitting an application. Senator Durbin just said yes, so I'm just trying to make the connection because I'm trying to understand why you think you have to do the science, and I don't think you're suggesting that because they've applied that they can sell the market until they've been disproven. Is that accurate? There is no safe harbor by simply submitting an application. Anyone who does not have authorization through the appropriate PMTA pathway or other pathways is on the market.
Okay, so just to be clear, if I can rob Senator Durbin, what the hell are we talking about here then? Is this legal? Is it illegal? Is it subject to review and approval of an application? I'm sorry to go over, Senator Durbin, but I'm trying to get an answer to your question, actually.
I can't go through every single product on that chart, but I will tell you that it's
the point here is this is a shelf full of potentially dangerous substances in a store in the shadow of the FDA building. I'm just trying to figure out if any of this is illegal or how in the hell it's legal. I mean, why? I mean, that seems like a legitimate question, right? Okay.
I'm happy to answer.
So,
if I have.
I mean, maybe we should go to the audience. I'm just trying to get an answer to that. I'm trying to understand why this is happening in North Carolina. I just don't understand it.
Yeah,
but
no, I'd appreciate the opportunity to respond.
I'll come back for a second round of questions. Okay. I do want to back up, though, and understand that I would much prefer, I used to dip tobacco, and then I went to a nicotine pouch substance. And last September, when the sales went off, I told myself I was going to quit cold turkey, and I got off of nicotine. Now, I had that option to get off tobacco, that some people could throw a baby out with the bathwater and not have that even for adult. This is something that lets people move off of the cancer-causing substances in tobacco into something safer, and then ultimately, maybe for somebody like me, just quit. So I hope as we're having this discussion that we recognize if we take this stuff off the market, then people are not going to say, well, nicotine's not available anymore, I guess I'll just stop. They're going to go back to a more harmful substance, and we need to make sure that baby doesn't get thrown out with the bathwater.
Senator Tom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, questioning Brian King, director of the FDA Center for Tobacco Products, at today's Judiciary Committee hearing. Again, from the Associated Press article about the hearing, on Monday, the FDA and DOJ announced a new government task force, which will include the U.S. Postal Service and other agencies to try and tackle the problem. Senator Tom Tillis called the timing of the announcement a political stunt and criticized the absence of other federal agencies from the initiative, including Customs and Border Protection. That reporting from AP. From NBC News, children in residential treatment facilities run by some of the country's largest behavioral health companies are at risk for sexual abuse, dangerous physical restraints, and over-medication, problems compounded by weak oversight and a system that optimizes profit over the well-being and safety of children, a Senate committee reported Wednesday. The report found rampant civil rights violations, including the overuse of seclusion and of chemical restraints, injections intended to keep children calm even when they were already relaxed or cooperative. That was reporting from NBC News. It was the Senate Finance Committee that did this investigation and held a hearing about it today. Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, is the chair.
Just this morning, the committee released a new investigative report with shocking details about the treatment of kids in these facilities. And these facilities get big dollars from programs under the jurisdiction of this committee, specifically Medicaid and child welfare funds. There are endless examples of sexual, physical, and verbal abuse, improper restraint and seclusion on young children, unsafe and unsanitary conditions, and even a total lack of provision of behavioral health care. Unfortunately, it seems more often than not, abuse and neglect is the norm at these facilities. And they are set up in a way that makes it happen. The system is failing, except the providers running these treatment facilities who have figured out how to turn big profits off taxpayer-funded child abuse. I don't say that lightly. Our staff spent several years looking at the biggest companies in the industry: Universal Health Services, Acadia Healthcare, Devereaux Advanced Behavioral Health, and Vivant Behavioral Health. Our investigative team reviewed 25,000 pages of company documents, had dozens of conversations with experts, pored over article after article, and saw the problems firsthand when they visited the facilities. Overwhelmingly, it's clear that the operating model for these facilities is to warehouse as many kids as possible while keeping costs low in order to maximize profit. That means intentional understaffing, with persons who have zero experience or qualifications to provide the care these children need.
Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, chair of the Finance Committee, opening up today's hearing. Reality TV star Paris Hilton, who has testified in the past about her own abuse at a facility for troubled teens, posting today on X the Senate Finance Committee's report, Warehouses of Neglect, How Taxpayers Are Funding Systemic Abuse in Youth Residential Treatment Facilities, is mind-blowing. Allegations were found of systemic and severe physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, as well as inadequate care, unsafe and unsanitary conditions, and oversight and regulatory failures. Huge thank you to the committee for believing survivors and taking a stand. I know firsthand the horrors that happen behind the closed doors of these facilities. That was the post on X by Paris Hilton. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Thursday on C-SPAN Radio. At 10 a.m. Eastern, FAA Administrator Michael Whitaker testifies before the Senate Commerce Committee on his agency's oversight of manufacturing and aviation processes at Boeing. Then at 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time, Microsoft President Brad Smith testifies before the House Homeland Security Committee on recent cybersecurity failures at several federal agencies, including the Commerce and State Departments. Also, former President Trump is on Capitol Hill. We'll have coverage and reaction of his meetings with Republicans. It's all Thursday on C-SPAN Radio. Listen on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app or ask your smart speaker to play C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. The House today started work on the annual Defense Policy and Programs bill. The House version, according to CQ Roll Call, authorizes $888.7 billion in discretionary spending, equal to the president's request, and $8.9 billion, or 1% more, than fiscal year 2024, and consistent with the cap on defense spending set by last year's debt limit law. It includes $849.8 billion for the Defense Department, $33.3 billion for the Energy Department's nuclear weapon and related activities. The total includes $295 billion for operations and maintenance and $163.6 billion for weapons and other procurement, both less than requested in order to help fund a 19.5% pay increase for most enlisted personnel. That was the summary from CQ Roll Call. Congressman Mike Rogers, Republican from Alabama, chair of the Armed Services Committee, started the House floor debate by noting that this year's bill has a new name to reflect the new focus.
For the first time in decades, this year's defense bill carries a different short title. It's the Service Member Quality of Life and National Defense Authorization Act. We did that to underscore the tremendous gains this bill makes toward improving the quality of life for our service members and their families. No service member should have to live in squalid conditions. No military family should have to rely on food stamps to feed their children. And no one serving this country should have to wait weeks to see a doctor or mental health professional. But that's exactly what many of our service members are experiencing, especially our junior enlisted personnel. This bill goes a long way toward fixing that. It includes a 20% pay raise for junior enlisted. It expands allowances for housing and food and improves the cost of living calculation. The bill authorizes $766 million over the budget request to improve existing barracks and build new ones. It enables the services to pursue public-private partnerships to provide better unaccompanied housing. The bill reduces dangerous healthcare wait times by waiving referral requirements for specialty care and expanding the number of DoD doctors and nurses with special recruitment and pay authorities. The bill improves access to child care for military families by providing over $206 million to build new DoD child care centers and fully funding child care fee assistance programs to offset the cost of private child care. The bill helps military spouses gain and retain employment by making it easier for them to transfer professional licenses between states. It also gives the DoD the authority to quickly hire military spouses and keep them employed during changes in duty stations. We are making these historic improvements in the quality of life of our service members because now, more than ever, we need to recruit and retain the best and brightest. That's because the threats our nation faces, especially those from China, are more complex and challenging than at any other point in the last 40 years.
Congressman Mike Rogers, Republican from Alabama, chair of the Armed Services Committee on the House floor. Lindsay McPherson, Capitol Hill reporter for the Washington Times, has written an article that begins, House Republicans are teeing up amendment votes to the annual defense bill on several culture war issues that, if adopted, will likely turn most Democrats against the measure. She joins us now on the phone. Thanks for being with us. What are some of these culture war issues?
So a couple of the big ones are there's an amendment to basically overturn the Pentagon policy that they did via executive action in 2022 that allows service members to have paid leave and get reimbursed travel costs for seeking abortions. Republicans want to block that policy from being enforced through this bill. They also want to block military health plans from being able to cover transgender hormone treatments and sex reassignment surgeries. There are several amendments related to diversity, equity, and inclusion roles in the military and the Pentagon that they're trying to eliminate and cut back on, as well as climate initiatives and other things like that.
The House Republicans know that the president would oppose these, might even veto the bill based upon any of them being included, and they may not even get past the Senate. So what's the rationale for bringing them up and putting them into the House bill?
Right. There's definitely different schools of thought there. Certainly, I talked to Mike Rogers, who's the Armed Services Chairman today, who said, he would have he prefers that they not pass some of these amendments because, as they did this last year, and a lot of those things got pulled out of the final version negotiated with the Senate, and he'd rather, them just not start from a losing negotiation. But at the same time, Republicans on the further right side and the conservatives think that they have to start with the most conservative bill possible to get anything in the negotiations with the Senate. Obviously, that didn't work for them last year. They did basically a similar thing. They passed the abortion amendment, the transgender amendment, that all those were included in the House bill and then stripped from the final version. But I think another thing is we've seen a lot of rule votes, which are the things that bring up the bill for debate, and you have to adopt the rule before you can move on to the bill, have failed when, conservatives have been unhappy with the policy and, some of the strategy. So I think that leaders calculated that if they didn't give conservatives at least the votes on their amendments, that they would be unlikely to adopt the rule and proceed to the bill. So that was certainly a factor as well.
Some other hot-button issues that are likely to come up during the debate on the Defense Policy and Programs Bill, foreign policy dealing with Ukraine and Gaza. What amendments are allowed based on those issues?
They made several in order. There are a couple of different ones. One's as simple as sending a message that Israel is the U.S.'s strongest ally and calling for release of the hostages. That might be less divisive than some of the others. There are some that are seeking to block any funds authorized in the bill from going to help rebuilding efforts in Gaza, so that could be more controversial. There's one that has to do with not providing any funds for the U.S. pier that has been used to deliver aid in Gaza as well. So some of those could certainly show some divisions that we've already seen on the House floor over the Israel-Hamas war.
We're talking with Lindsay McPherson, reporter with the Washington Times. The overall bill, what is it like this year compared to what the president requested for defense and compared to last year?
I mean, the numbers are in line with what they, the overall defense number. I think it's just under $900 billion. And that is in line with what they approved in the debt limit negotiations last year, the budget cap. So the Senate Republicans who are the Senate Republicans are pushing for a higher amount of defense spending, and they are negotiating, or they're doing their markup with the Democrats this week in committee, and we'll have more later this week on the results of that. So they could take a different position than the House, but the House has stuck to the limits, under the law.
And finally, the chair and the ranking Democrat of the committee on the House floor today made mention that the bill title is a little bit different this year compared to previous years, emphasizing pay and benefits for the troops and their families.
Yeah, like I said, Mike Rogers, the chairman who I talked to earlier, said that for the first time in, I think he said 7 decades, that they have made significant improvements to the quality of life for members. Not just, they often give members or service members a pay raise, and they do in this bill of 5% raise for all service members, but they give I think it's 19.5% for more junior service members. They also expand the housing allowance to cover, on average, the 100% of your local rental rate. So that's been a shortage. A lot of service members, their housing allowances aren't covering their needs for housing. They're trying to beef up access to health care, child care, lots of initiatives to improve the quality of life for people who want to serve in the armed services.
Lindsay McPherson, Washington Times Capitol Hill reporter. Find her articles at WashingtonTimes.com and on X at Lindsay McPherson. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
President Joe Biden, writes AP, and President Volodymyr Zelensky will sign a bilateral security agreement between the U.S. and Ukraine on Thursday when they meet on the sidelines of the Group of Seven summit in Italy, aiming to send a signal to Russia of American resolve to support Kyiv, the White House said as Biden was heading to Europe. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told reporters that the agreement would not commit U.S. troops directly to Ukraine's defense against Russia's invasion, a red line drawn by Biden, who is fearful of being drawn into direct conflict between the nuclear-armed powers. Jake Sullivan spoke to reporters as they, and President Biden flew to Italy.
Tomorrow, President Biden and President Zelensky will sit down to discuss our strong support for Ukraine now and into the future. Following that meeting, the leaders will sign a bilateral security agreement, making clear our support will last long into the future and pledging continued cooperation, particularly in the defense and security space. You all will recall that in July of 23, just under a year ago at the Vilnius summit, President Biden organized the G7 around a joint declaration of support for Ukraine that highlighted our commitment to pursue these security agreements. Our G7 partners have done so. Another 25 countries have actually signed on to that joint declaration. Many of them have also done these security agreements. So we announced last year that each country would essentially commit to negotiate a long-term bilateral security arrangement with Ukraine. At this point, 15 countries have signed their agreements, and I'm pleased to share that our negotiations with Ukraine have concluded, and we'll sign this agreement tomorrow. Our goal here is straightforward. We want to demonstrate that the U.S. supports the people of Ukraine, that we stand with them, and that we'll continue to help address their security needs, not just tomorrow, but out into the future. In the agreement, which we will share with all of you later this week, we outline a clear vision of work with our allies and partners, with Ukraine, in order to continue to strengthen Ukraine's credible defense and deterrence capability. Any lasting peace in Ukraine has to be underwritten by Ukraine's own ability to defend itself and deter future aggression. And by signing this, we'll also be sending Russia a signal of our resolve. If Vladimir Putin thinks that he can outlast the coalition supporting Ukraine, he's wrong. He just cannot wait us out, and this agreement will show our resolve and continued commitment. Through this commitment, we're also securing through this agreement, we're also securing commitments from Ukraine on reforms and on end-use monitoring for weapons we provide. And in deepening cooperation with Ukraine, our government will benefit from Ukraine's insights and experience, its battlefield innovations, and its lessons learned from the front.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan opening up a news conference on Air Force One as they all flew to Italy for the G7 summit. New York Times reports that President Biden has approved the deployment of another Patriot missile system to Ukraine, senior administration and military officials said, as the country struggles to fend off Russian attacks on its city's infrastructure and electrical grid. From CBS News, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Wednesday that some changes Hamas wants to the current Gaza ceasefire proposal are unworkable, accusing the group of dragging its heels and prolonging the suffering of the Palestinian people. His remarks came a day after Hamas submitted its formal response to the U.S.-backed proposal, stressing, quote, the necessity to completely stop the ongoing aggression on Gaza and the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip. That was reporting from CBS News. Secretary Blinken spoke at a news conference today in Doha, Qatar, where he's been working with the Qataris and Egyptians and others to reach a final ceasefire agreement with all parties.
Stephanie Seladakis, Reuters.
Hi, thank you. Secretary Blinken, do you agree with Israel's assessment that Hamas rejected the deal? And what specific changes were proposed by Hamas? What specifically do you find workable and not workable? Can you confirm that Hamas wants written guarantees from the United States for a permanent ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip in order to sign off on the proposal? And can you provide those guarantees?
So what we received last night, all of us, in terms of the response from Hamas, were changes that they sought, they seek, in the proposal that President Biden put forward, that Israel and the entire world has accepted. So the question is whether any of those changes that they have sought, they seek, are workable, bridgeable, or not. And I'm not going to obviously characterize or describe what they're looking for. All I can tell you, having gone over this with our colleagues, is that we believe that some of the requested changes are workable and some are not. And so we have to see on an urgent basis over the course of the coming days whether those gaps are bridgeable, in a way that upholds the agreement, the proposal that President Biden puts on the table. Because again, this is not about changing fundamentals. It's about seeing if we can bridge the gaps that have been exposed by Hamas's response. And I can't tell you right now whether we'll succeed. I believe it's doable. I believe it's absolutely necessary to try our hardest to do it, but there's no guarantee.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at a news conference in Doha, Qatar, with the Qatari Prime Minister. It was the Secretary's final stop on his latest Mideast trip that also included Egypt, Israel, and Jordan. Associated Press reports that Secretary Blinken's comments came as Lebanon's Hezbollah fired a massive barrage of rockets into northern Israel to avenge the killing of a top commander, further escalating regional tensions. And finally, on Washington Today, from ABC News in Washington, D.C., lawmakers are once again putting aside their differences on Capitol Hill and taking to the ball field, where they'll participate in the annual congressional baseball game at Nationals Park, a tradition that dates back to 1909. Tickets for the game only cost $10, and the money goes towards a great cause. The Congressional Baseball Game's popularity has contributed to its evolution into a foundation called Congressional Sports for Charity. The foundation announced this morning that the game has raised over $2 million for charities and sold more than 25,000 tickets, smashing the previous attendance and fundraising record set in 2023. That was from WJLA ABC 7 in D.C. The Democrats have a new pitcher this year, Senator Alex Padilla of California, who was interviewed by Fox 11 in Los Angeles.
So as I've talked to my wife, Angela, and my three boys, number one, don't hurt yourself. So we're stretching, we're exercising, we're trying to make sure that we can get to the game unscathed. Number two, my priority, try not to embarrass myself. So we're not going to try to overdo it. We're going to keep it simple. We're going to go out there, have some fun for a good cause. It's an annual congressional baseball game that raises money for local charities. You know, the YMCA's here in the District of Columbia region. The Capitol Police Foundation and others are beneficiaries. So it's been fun to be back out in the field. Flashbacks to my Little League days, my high school baseball days, lived vicariously through my kids, as you know, these last few years, helping coach Little League. But to be out on the field myself, I got to tell you, it feels good.
Okay, so is it a fastball? Is it a slider? Is it a curveball? What is the Alex Padilla pitching repertoire that we should be looking forward to?
Well, there used to be a fastball and an off speed and a split finger, but these days I'm happy just throwing strikes.
Senator Alex Padilla, Democrat from California, interviewed by the Fox Los Angeles affiliate TV station. He's the starting pitcher for tonight's congressional baseball game on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, the pitcher again will be Congressman Greg Steube of Florida, who was interviewed along with the team manager, Congressman Roger Williams of Texas, by Newsmax.
Your stats are incredible. I mean, absolutely. You are certainly a player that everybody loves to watch. You have a 13-year-old son. Are you his hero?
Yeah, so what was great about, and we were just actually talking about having our sons here and our family here on the field. When I hit the home run a couple of years ago, he was actually in the dugout. We got a good picture of him. cheering as I was running around the bases. So hopefully the Democrats will throw me strikes this year. Last year they walked me 3 times, so I keep giving the pitchers a hard time. Like it's a game once a year. Just let us hit the ball.
This is certainly an event, obviously, that promotes unity among Democrats and Republicans. But, Coach, is there some trash talking on the field?
A lot of trash talking, and I got to be honest with you, it's not bipartisan. Okay, they want to beat us as bad as we want to beat them, and that's the way it should be. I mean, the game's been played for over 100 years, a lot of tradition, but it's not bipartisan. So when people watch the game, knowing that both sides are playing really hard to win the game.
Congressman Roger Williams and Congressman Greg Steube, Republicans at the field this morning, Nationals Park, as they were preparing for tonight's congressional baseball game. Starts 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll have live coverage on C-SPAN Radio and C-SPAN Television. Republicans have won the game the last 3 years. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, Word for Word, and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.